Thank you for joining us today. Educators all over the world are rapidly transitioning to learning online, some for the very first time. AWS and Amazon put together a webinar series for educators by educators who have expertise in online learning. Today, we have Sherry Crofut, who's an education consultant and classroom instructor. She's going to talk all about transitioning to online learning. Before we get started, know that you are all muted, but we certainly want to hear from you. Please use the question pane on the GoToWebinar control panel to communicate with us. We will answer your questions as we go along and also have a dedicated time at the end to answer additional questions. Now, I would like to introduce Sherry Crofut.
Hi, my name is Sherry Crofut. Welcome to our webinar on transitioning to online learning. We're so glad you could join us today. Let me switch over to our screen share and we will get started. So we're going to be talking about transition to online learning, like I said. I know a lot of you guys are just getting started in that, so we're going to spend some time talking about it. So we're going to do the introduction portion. We're going to talk about getting started, collaboration, assignments, and we will have a question and answer period coming up. So as you go through, there's going to be some things I'm going to ask you to look at. You will be able to share some of those during the question and answer period as well. So like I said, my name is Sherry Crofut. I'm an education consultant. I've been doing this for 9 years. I've taught master's degree classes on distance learning. So I'm excited to be talking to you about that today. You can keep in touch. My Twitter is SD Sherry. That's like for South Dakota Sherry, because that's where I'm located. And I will give you that at the end of this presentation as well. So we want to talk about the first things that we need to think about as we get started. And before we get too far, I do want to do a big thank you. I know a lot of you guys have had to put together online learning in the last, in just a few hours or a few days. You're still trying to figure this out. This isn't something we planned for, but it is something that we definitely have to deal with. So I know you had little notice. I know you've jumped in, and we appreciate your willingness to keep working towards doing what's best for our students. This is a time for grace and forgiveness. So as you are getting started with this, I need you to understand, first and foremost, you're going to make mistakes. It's just going to happen. Not everything is going to run as perfectly as you'd like it to, but that happens in our classrooms every day. It's also a time to give some forgiveness and grace to our students. They've never learned it this way. This is completely new to them as well. And we want to make certain that we're also forgiving our parents, because they're in many ways just stuck at home trying to figure this out, trying to do the best they can to help their kids. So we want to kind of take this slow and easy for ourselves, for the kids, for the parents, and just let everybody know we're in this together, and we're going to learn how to do this and figure it out together. So first of all, we want to talk about a learning management system. I know a lot of districts have already decided on what learning management system you're going to use, and it really doesn't matter which one it is. You all are just going to need to have something that you can give content to your students, give them links to things you want them to get to. Whatever you are going to be doing for your classwork, you're going to want to be able to put it in the learning management system. Now, we also have to consider that not all of our students have technology. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But as far as the learning management system that you choose, there are all kinds of tips and tricks out there. Don't worry about these links. We're going to share them with you. And at the end, we're going to share this entire slide deck with you. So you're going to have all these links. But there's all kinds of tips and tricks out there for whatever learning management system you're using. These are just a couple that I found quickly, but you can Google whichever one you're using, and you'll find all kinds of people are sharing great tricks that they're coming up with. Each of the learning management systems themselves have their own tips and tricks. So take a few minutes and make sure that you know how your learning management system works best. Okay, as we get into the technology, a couple things we really have to think about, and that's that our kids are all using different devices. So we can't ask anything that's device specific. We have to know that, in a lot of cases, if they have siblings, they're sharing the technology. If parents are working from home, they may be using the technology. So it's not a great time for you to decide that you need to webinar with your kids for 6 hours a day. That's just not going to work at all. And that's more than what you need to be doing anyway. We want to, we do have to consider those kids that don't have the technology available. We want to make certain that they have the access to some of the work, and we'll have to get creative as to how we give them packets. And by packets, I'm not talking about 40 pages of worksheets. We need to have them doing real and meaningful assignments as well. So we're going to have a lot to think about as we're going through this. We also know that from time to time, the technology is going to glitch. I had a teacher call me last week, and she was absolutely in tears because her Google Classroom wasn't working, and she'd spent hours trying to figure it out. So first I scolded her for waiting so long to call me, and then we were able to go through it and troubleshoot it together. I opened up a Zoom meeting. She had hers open, and she was able to show me her actual screen. I was able to have her click through a couple things, and we got her all figured out, and she was set to go. So then 2 nights ago, she said, okay, I have a problem, but I called you right away. And again, we kind of talked through the problem, and she figured it out on her own. She really didn't need my help, but she needed somebody to talk it through. So know that we're going to have to deal with the technology that's going to have some issues. It's not going to work always the way we think it's going to work. And we're just going to have to roll with that. But as teachers, you're used to being flexible. You have a classroom going along, and then there's a fire drill or something, and we have to change plans midstream. So you're used to being flexible. You'll do fine. You'll get through it just fine. Video conferencing. I think that this is probably one of the best things that we have available if we have to have a crisis like this. We need to be seen by our students. They miss us. They miss their friends. So using a video conferencing tool is an excellent way to check in with them, kind of see what's going on. You could teach a mini lesson, but I highly recommend that you record those mini lessons in case some of your students can't be on at the same time. If you're going to do it live with them, just go ahead and hit the record on your video conferencing tool so that you can post that later for kids to either refer back to, or like I said, the ones that can't be there at that time, they would be able to access it later. So you can use Chime like we're using now. There's Zoom out there. There's Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams. There's all kinds of tools. And again, it's just a tool. It doesn't matter which one you're using as long as you know how to use that one tool. With that in mind, I know we're hearing a lot of things about things like Zoom bombing, and there's always trolls on the internet that are going to kind of try to mess with us. So I've added some tips and tricks here. For the Zoom bombing, there are some Zoom settings, and that's the first link here. Again, I'm not going to worry about you getting these right now. We're going to post those in the chat. We're going to give you this later. But this one on Zoom setting tells you how to go into the settings to kind of avoid some of the bad things that could be happening. So in this section, we've talked about forgiveness for you, your students, and their parents. Those are super important. We've talked about learning management systems. It really doesn't matter which one you're using. Technology, everybody's using something different. We're going to have glitches. We're going to have to work through those. It's going to be fine. Reach out to a friend if you're really getting frustrated. Don't let yourself get to the point of tears. And video conferencing. Your students need to see you. They miss you. They need that constant in their life. So please, please take some time to check in with your students via video. We're going to also talk about colleagues and beyond that. So this is an important time to do collaboration. And we want to collaborate with our building colleagues. We want to collaborate with other teachers. We want to collaborate with teachers we don't even know. That's the great thing about technology right now. A school that I work with, I was really concerned because I found out that they were still meeting at their school building face-to-face. And she said, oh, don't worry, we're meeting in groups of just 4 or less. And I'm like, well, and then she said, but there are maybe 20 people in the building at any given time. So I've encouraged her to use the technology to do those collaboration meetings with her colleagues as well. We just don't want people getting sick. And when they're talking about shelter in place, they really do mean shelter in place. So I think she's talked them into moving to their meetings in Zoom is what they're using. And so hopefully they're being safe about how they're collaborating. Social media is so important. There has never been a better time ever to use social media than right now. There are so many people out there sharing great things. A lot of the most brilliant people I know they're home and they're bored and they're creating content to share with any teacher out there. If you're not on Twitter, I'm going to super recommend that you set up an account. You don't have to share anything, but you can go out and follow people. You could start by following me. I'm going to share a friend that we're going to talk about here in a minute. And then you can look at who we're following. Now, to be fair, on my Twitter account, mostly I use it for education. I do follow a couple celebrities. So when you go through my list, give me some grace. It's just fun for me. But I do recommend that you connect with some educators because so many things are being shared out there. So I'm going to share just one example. Daisha Jones, if you don't know her, you're going to love her. She's on Twitter. Like I said, she's really bored right now, so she's posting a lot of things. She has her own website, which is www.engageinspireexpectinform.com. And I have been going through because every day she adds multiple posts on her Facebook, some different assignments that she's suggesting, links to some really great things. So I've been curating her Facebook account with her permission, and I've been putting everything daily into a Google Doc. And you're going to be able to find that at bit.ly/Daisha Jones. And in just a moment, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to either look through her Twitter account. And like I said, if you don't have Twitter, it's a great time to set it up, or her website, or the pages that I've put together on Google Docs. I know we were well over 30 pages, and by the time this airs, we'll probably be much further than that. And so I want to give you guys 5 minutes to look through some of her things because I really want you to see how important it is right now to be doing that. So let me set my timer and go. Okay, we're going to give you about 1 more minute and then we'll get back to our presentation. Okay, so if you all would come back together. I hope you found that useful. Disha is just one of thousands of educators out there that are sharing information. So I appreciate that she let me share her stuff. You can find her on Twitter. You can also find her on Facebook. She's totally fine with anybody who requests friendship with her because she loves, loves, loves what she's doing. But like I said, there are thousands of other educators out there that are doing that. If you go onto Twitter, you can look through her friends list. You can look through my friends list. You can connect with all kinds of people and find great, great stuff. So this is a good time for you to be doing that. So in this section, we did talk about collaborating with your colleagues in your building and the ones that are afar. We all have teacher friends that either work in other buildings or other states. Great time to check in with them. All of you are in the same boat. You're sharing, you need to share what's going well for you. You need to talk to them about what you're concerned about and see how you can help each other. This is a great time to use social media to take advantage of the resources that are out there. There are so many things being freely shared. So please, please, please consider doing those things. So we're going to get into the assignments that we're going to be doing. And we really have to talk about how we're doing more of a hybrid. And we have some online learning. That's maybe some of the stuff you're putting in your LMS, some of the webinars that we're doing with them. And then there's self-paced learning. And we need to balance that out. And now is not the time to have kids doing 8 hours of work a day. So this is a little bit different than just virtual or online learning. Our kids are afraid. There's a lot of fear out there for the parents as well, so they're feeding into that as well. They're anxious. They've never done this way. And a lot of states are recognizing that. I'm sure places around the world are recognizing that. So we're more crisis teaching, and we need to keep that in mind as we go through. So as you're getting to your content, which is important, we want you kind of to ease into it with the kids. Like I said, this isn't a great time for a lot of worksheets, although if that's how you need to start, that's fine. But we want to get the kids into some meaningful online learning. It's a great time to have them where we tie things into real world in their homes. I know when I was a kid, when we were doing fractions, I learned my fractions best by cooking. You use a quarter a cup of this and an eighth of a cup of that, and that's where I did my best work, was cooking. So if you're teaching fractions, that might be something to encourage the kids, if they can, to cook a meal for their parents. There are just different ways we can go about doing what we're doing and letting the kids use what they do at home to tie into their learning. So we want to talk about the assignments we're giving. Again, they need to be really authentic. This is not a time to just give them busy work. Like I said, you may start with that just because you're still trying to figure out the LMS and that kind of thing, but we really don't want to bog the kids down. And I do have a teacher who told me one of her colleagues sent home a 40-page packet of just worksheets for the kids. And the parents are calling her freaking out because there's so much in there, and there's no real place that outside their textbook that they're getting help on that. So we know that that's not what we want the kids to be doing. So with that in mind, this is really awesome because there are all kinds of ed tech companies out there that are offering paid services for free during this pandemic. And this is just one place, Amazing Educational Resources, that have curated many of those. They're adding to it on a regular basis. They started out with a Google spreadsheet. They have now placed that, it is still the spreadsheet, but they've placed it on a website, amazingeducationalresources.com, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes to look at that here in a minute. They also have a Facebook page, and people are talking about the different resources on the Facebook page. And as a side note, they're not the only ones with a group on Facebook. I'm also in a group called Teaching During the Pandemic 2020, where teachers are sharing ideas and resources all the time. So when I talk social media, I'm talking about that as well. We can use, I have tended to use my Facebook primarily more for my personal life and my Twitter more for my educational life. But right now it's getting really mixed together because there's so many great things happening on Facebook as well. So I'm going to go ahead and give you 3 minutes to look through. And I know it says 5 minutes. I'm going to shorten that to 3 minutes and look through amazingeducationalresources.com. Okay, if you all would come back together again. I know 3 minutes is not nearly enough time to look through that entire list. There are some really great things out there that I think you're going to want to save that link and look through. This is a super awesome time to find out what's in some of those things. I've been spending some time looking at that list and opening things up, and it's just amazing how generous these companies are being to help us through this time. This is also a time to remember the resources that you've already been using. You might be using Khan Academy, you might be using some other place, but you don't have to create all the content for your kids, particularly the ones that do have the technology. We're able to utilize this and leverage it to help us do our job in a way that makes sense for us and makes it easier for us. So this is also a really good time to talk about student collaboration. The kids miss each other so much. And I know it's a little tougher to have students collaborate when we're all separated like we are, but they have the technology. They can use FaceTime, they can use Google Hangouts, they can use whatever video conferencing you're using. They can text each other, they can call each other. So if it's possible to do some student collaboration, I encourage you to have the kids do that because it's one of the things we've been working on anyway in classes, but we do want to let those kids have a purpose for connecting. So I just want to wrap this section up. We talked about things that we need to utilize to make the most of the students learning from home. We want to start slow and easy. We have free access to more resources than ever before, and that's super exciting. And we need to encourage our students to collaborate whenever possible. So that's going to wrap up my part of this webinar for today. We are going to go into some question and answers in just a minute. I want to thank you for joining me today. I'm super excited that AWS Educate let me do this. I will be available during some office hours that they're going to tell you about in just a few minutes. You can connect with me at Twitter, SDSherry. If you're on Facebook, you can find me in at Sherry Hughley Crofut. So that makes it easier to find me when I add up my maiden name. Or you can email me at sherrycrofut@gmail.com. I'm like all those other educator consultants that are out here doing nothing at this time. So when I get contacted and you all want help, I'm really excited to be able to help you. Like I said, there's going to be some office hours you're going to be able to connect with me as well. And I hope that this webinar finds you healthy and doing well, and you're not letting this stress you out. We're here to help you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Sherry. The strategies were amazing. Tremendous amount of resources to really help educators get started with remote learning. We truly appreciate hearing your perspective and best practices. If you have any questions, please ask them through the question pane now. We really want to hear from you. You'll find this in the GoToWebinar control panel. If we do not get to your question, or you want to dive a little bit deeper, you can certainly register for office hours by going to the link on the screen, as well as the one we will place within the chat window. You can also find and register for more webinars about the transition to online learning by going to this link on the screen. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate all the questions and comments that have come in. We're going to take the next several minutes here to answer your questions. Sherry, thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciate, all the things that you were able to share today. And I know I saw you were answering questions as they came in. I know there were some questions that came in and want to continue to see those coming in, but I didn't know if there's one that I'll start with one that kind of came up that maybe you can speak to a little bit, and it's around multiple learning management systems. I know we kind of kicked off, that was kind of one of the first things of knowing that there's so many out there. There's so many that educators maybe are required to use, but there was a question that came in around, if I have a fairly young student, someone who, I think it was a person who was in the 5th grade, if they're using multiple LMSs, is there an opinion on should they be doing that, or what can you do with having students go to multiple systems?
Well, I think that multiple systems, particularly for elementary kids, are tough. It's ideal if they can all work in the same one that they've become familiar with. However, 5th graders are at that cusp where I think they could use both of them. I think, kids switch between apps and things all the time because they're far more tech savvy, if you will, than most adults are. So they'll probably do okay, but I would prefer they were using the same one. It's not ideal to use more than one, but it can be done.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've heard we've run quite a number of office hours, just think of a kind of a help desk where educators have come in and asked some similar questions around that. One of the things that we found, if they, if there's some reason they have to use multiple learning management systems, if you can coordinate or help to coordinate with other educators on a set of due dates, right? So you're not having students get confused on what's due when. A common one I've heard is like, hey, everything is due Friday at 4 p.m. or you make up whatever that is, but just kind of coordinating when things are due, and that helps ease confusion. And that's not just for those who are young students, that's for those who are higher ed or master's students. We've heard that from quite a number. If there's some coordination that can be done, especially if they have to use multiple systems of just when are things due, instead of having it rotate, of having kind of a set date, a set time. I know that helps with students just kind of organizing what they're doing during the week, when some of them may have to share device with siblings, share devices with their parents who may be working. So I've heard that is a good tip.
Well, and I think that's important to remember, but we also have to remember that we need to be liberal with that time we're giving the kids. Mm-hmm. We don't want it to be, here's your assignment, it's due tomorrow. We want to give them time to work through things. And like you said, a lot of them are sharing their technology and don't have access to it all the time. So we want to keep using that grace and giving them the time they need to continue what they're doing.
Yeah, very true. I know some questions have also come in about synchronous versus asynchronous learning. I know you touched on it in the presentation. When we think about online learning, I think it depends on the topic. It depends on what you're doing, but I think would love your opinion on is it something you provide both opportunities to students? What works great as asynchronous? What maybe works better as, of course, synchronous learning?
Well, I think that if you're doing the teaching portion, it can be done both ways. You can have some sessions where you actually talk through a concept with students, but it's great if you can record it and post that recording so that, first of all, the kids that weren't able to attend live have a way to access that information. But secondly, even the kids that were live, as they're working through that concept, it's great if they can go back and rewatch you using your examples and walking them through it. So I think, I know this is a difficult time, but it's also a great time to be practicing some really good teaching methods that we can continue to use even when we get back to whatever normal looks like. So I think everybody should tape any teaching that they're doing, but I also think that they need to be doing those sessions on whatever video conferencing they have where they're really checking in on the kids. Those kids really need to see your face. They need to know that you're still the stable force in their life, you're doing okay, and that you care about how they're doing.
Yeah, great point. I think another one of the questions that we've had questions come in around, do you have resources around foreign language? And I know we've had a lot of questions come in around students who are, maybe learning a new language or English language learners. Have you seen a lot of resources out there? I know we posted some links to just a huge amount of resources that have been kind of pulled together, but have you seen some specific around teaching foreign language or those for English language learners?
Okay, so I haven't looked for those specifically, but I will tell you that a couple weeks ago I got a text from a teacher in New Mexico, and they were just moving to online learning, and they are definitely in a community where it's a bilingual situation. So she said, I don't speak Spanish and I need some resources desperately for my Spanish speaking students. So while I didn't have any, because I'm connected with lots of educators, I contacted one in Texas who's actually, he's native Spanish speaker. She came from Mexico. And so I said, hey, this is my issue. I have a teacher that needs all these things. And seriously, within 5 minutes, she must have sent me 30 resources. So you just need to connect with somebody who maybe is native to that language, who can point you in great directions.
Yeah, I think making connections, via social media you're talking about, like I'm on Twitter as well. I tend to be a person who is a lurker. Like I read a ton of this stuff that comes out from 1,000 brains of educators from around the world. So it's great to connect there. One tool that I've heard brought up during our office hours from educators is they do utilize some of think of the machine learning services that are out there that do this. So if they're recording, say, a 3-5 minute video, they'll utilize something like YouTube, which does some of the transcribing, and it will do some of the translation. It's not perfect, but it does help in being able to provide that option for captioning. So I have heard that as a resource that people have been using out there. Another question, and Sherry, feel free to jump in, and if you have questions that you saw that maybe I missed that were answered even earlier, to ask them. But one is around how labs can be constructed during this time. Any thoughts? I know you mentioned a resource from Dacia. I'm sure she has probably lots of things around labs and doing things with students. Any ideas around how do you do labs as a part of online instruction?
Well, it sort of depends on what kind of labs. I mean, if you're talking a chemistry lab, most students probably don't have the materials at home to do the experiments we would like them to be doing. And some things may just have to go on hold. You can't You can't always do everything at home, but we can do some other kind of labs. I mean, I think I mentioned in this that we have the opportunity to use real life situations where we can have kids maybe cooking, and while they're cooking, they're learning fractions and many other things. So you can think outside the box and find how you can teach a concept maybe with things they would have at home. You can always create kits that you send home, have somebody pick up, or you drop them on their doorsteps or that kind of thing. But you really don't want to stress yourself out too much with those kind of things. Most areas I've talked to, they've lifted a lot of the restrictions around what has to be taught during this time. So keep that in mind. But still, if there are other kinds of labs, like where you want kids collaborating with each other, and they can do that via their technology, I think it's super great to encourage that, because like I said, they're missing each other something terrible, and we want to give them purpose for talking to each other. So when you can, do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen some interesting things that have come up around labs. Myself, I was a former biology teacher, so a lot of the things that I've seen out there has been very quick videos where it poses a question. You'll do a part of the lab, and then they'll pose a question like for students of what comes next, what would be your next step, and they'll pause,
Absolutely.
and then they'll have students kind of react, and the next day they'll post the next video that has that next step, and then all right, I've done this. uh, you know, they'll start to see like what can you collect from a data standpoint from here. A lot of things in labs are visual. If not, you can have visuals where it's showing on the screen of data points that are collected. So it's always posing questions back for students of what comes next. And I think that leads to another question that I saw in here, Sherry, around assessments. Like, how do you assess students during this time? Are there good best practices for assessing students?
Well, first and foremost, we have to give the feeling that they're not having their parents do the work. We've got to use some amount of trust that they're actually doing the work themselves. Now, whether that's happening or not, perhaps their parents are learning a little bit about whatever subject you're teaching if they're helping them. But we can't always assume cheating is going on. If that's a concern for you, then I suggest that you give assignments that they can do with their family, and you assess that accordingly, that they had adult help, but that they did it together. Now, you can use video, which I think is great. A lot of kids have taken video of themselves explaining the concept. I think that shows you that they understand and they get it. But I know, again, a lot of states around me are kind of foregoing assessment a lot. They're not being very strict on having the kids prove they know everything. So you're going to kind of do a little of, each thing, and find what's working for you to get a sense that they know what's going on.
Yeah, and I have seen that a lot, especially the whole notion of students teaching a concept back can be very easy. I've had those who, it depends on, of course, your topic area, what you're having them, even as simple as setting up a cell phone with a little whiteboard, where they are just explaining the concept back within 2 or 3 minutes. It's a great way to get a check for understanding for those students. Another thing that I've seen, especially, is just quick, if there's a lot of free screen capturing tools that are out there. There's a lot of very low cost ones as well that we've seen students utilize, especially I've seen that in the higher ed space if they're having to record a process that they're going through, some coding that they're doing. We've seen them capture that and submit it in those forms. I know that's one way we've seen people just do, check to see if they're understanding the concept.
Well, I do have one middle school I'm working with, and we had a conference call yesterday, and they are absolutely set on not doing adding a whole lot of new tools, because they don't want to further complicate things for the teachers and the students. So they are trying to keep it as simple as possible. I know they're using a lot of Zoom, a lot of Google Classroom. So you're going to get both sides of that. Because some schools do not want them overwhelming kids with a lot of outside tools. So you're going to have to kind of make those decisions based on your thoughts and your district's thoughts as well.
Yeah, and we had a question come in around, what's the most basic, most simple tool or system for virtual meetings? There's a lot that are out there. One that we I think you mentioned before, seeing each other and doing that with video conferencing, no matter what the tool is always fantastic. I think one that came up in office hours that I'll point out is sometimes we forget that our phones can do conference lines too. So having very simple, if it's a few people, you can conference people in together, have voice. That can be a very simple method of doing it. And Sherry, I know you mentioned a few different systems out there. What have you seen from educators that they've been using? And I think you've mentioned a few already, but they just want to kind of figure out what's the simplest way to do this.
Some of them are using FaceTime because they already know FaceTime. I know a lot of districts started out using Zoom. I know some are really kind of being very cautious about Zoom right now because there have been problems. They've been hacked. They've had, trolls coming in doing terrible things. So they're getting a little nervous about that. But I have other districts that are still sending out here's the settings you need to set so that you don't have that happen. The other thing I also recommend when you're using any tool is if there's a link that you're going to post, like a Zoom link, that you don't post that days in advance. You say, we're going to have a meeting at such and such a time, and 5 minutes before I'll send you the link. And so you can find ways to kind of minimize the bad things that can be happening. But any tool that they've already used is great. If the kids have access to it, that's wonderful. FaceTime, unfortunately, is not one of those things that everybody has access to. My Android phone won't do it, but my iPad will. So I have lots of toys that I can play with, but not all of our kids do.
Very true. And I think part of the communication of people, I've seen some very creative ways of, not necessarily from a meeting standpoint, but for students communicating. And there's another question here that just talks about how do you address, student inquiries coming in? How do you individual students wanting to have questions? But one of the ways that I've heard that systems have done this is sometimes they have a voicemail system, and students have actually used that to call in and talk through an assignment or talk through, just a quick, letting their educator know, their understanding of a concept. So they've actually used a voicemail system, said, hey, call in, tell us what you know about this subject, just give us your 2-minute speech on this particular topic. So they've used kind of the voicemail as a way for students to submit assignments. So I've seen a lot of creative things being done with student submissions of assignments that don't necessarily require a lot of technology.
Absolutely. And I live and breathe technology. I love it, but not all teachers do. Not all kids are ready for it. So we need to be clever in how we mix the technology we're using and other ways to get the education they need and to communicate and keep it as simple as possible.
Absolutely. I think one of the other questions that kind of came in around that too, around, how do we address those individual students' questions that are coming in? One of the things I've certainly heard, and I've seen this actually with my own son and daughter, is teachers are setting up a set office hours. So something very common that's happened in higher ed. Something that they're setting up is like, hey, I'm doing this a few different times a week, where you can drop in and ask questions of me. Now that gets difficult if you start having 200, 300 students, but I have heard that from professors and from those who are teaching over a lot of students, that they set up some dedicated office hours. The piece with that is, I think you also, if you're going to have that, and Sherry, you can probably speak to this too, is also have another mechanism for students to ask questions. So if they can't make that dedicated time, that you have another way for them to connect with you.
Well, email, texting, and I know a lot of teachers have given their students their home cell number, whatever, so that the students can text them, because some of the students don't do as well with the email, particularly younger ones. So you have different methods that you can give the kids whatever, and you have to make it good for you. I mean, don't give them 47 different ways they can connect with you, and then you have to check 47 different ways. So you want to pick one or two ways that the kids can contact you personally and ask those questions, and then you kind of answer them as they come in or as you have time. If you have some set time that you sit down and you answer questions, that's fine as well. And you can let the kids know, I'll be answering questions until 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, whatever time you say, and say, but the evenings I will not be on. And I think that's perfectly fine, because we're not here to be available to the kids 24/7. But it is nice if you have a couple of evenings, because sometimes that's when kids have the time, or even, a Saturday morning, or whatever works for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very true. Any other things you want to address here, Sherry? Any questions that you saw that you wanted to speak to?
I didn't see other questions I was missing, but if there are, let me know, because I want to answer any questions I can. And I was really serious when I gave you all of my information. You can reach out to me on Twitter. You can reach out to me on Facebook. You can email me. I gave you all of those things, and I'm always happy to help with anything I can. And if I don't know the answer, which I don't claim to have all the answers, I have people, because I am very connected on social media. So I know people that we could probably find the answer from.
Perfect. And to kind of further that too, if you have questions that you want to have a deeper discussion with Sherry, with some of our educators from around the world, we do have office hours that are taking place today. I have placed that link into the chat window. We'll have office hours that are actually taking place here in roughly 30 minutes or so. We'll have it at 12:15 Eastern. So we'll have office hours coming up here today. We also have a later time this afternoon just for general questions that you may have around remote learning, questions that you want to dive deeper in with a group of educators who are willing to help. And again, they're joining us from all over the world. Encourage you to sign up for those office hours. They will continue through, again, like I said, we have two opportunities today. We have them through the next couple of weeks. In addition to that, there are, of course, additional webinars that are taking place next week that you can see some opportunities to learn more and dive deeper. But want to thank Sherry again. Thank you so much for your time today, for answering the questions, for the presentation. Really appreciate your efforts and your willingness to do this for the educator community.
I enjoy it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for joining. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you in an office hours or another webinar soon.
Bye.